All right, good afternoon, folks. Welcome once again to Change Management 4419. We want to go over a couple of the PowerPoints that you're going to utilize in responding to the change journals that are posted on a weekly basis. So one of the first ones that we want to look at is something that is called control versus shaping. So hopefully you can see that on your screen. Change management really looks at the way that companies and organizations do their daily operations. And then theoretically, there are two different ways that management looks at these operations, and one of them is called control, and one of them is called shaping. So when you're going through this, I want you to think about that there are two distinct ways that people that are running companies want to run companies and how they treat their employees. So these are referred to as images of change. Now, controlling, which most of us have been involved in terms of being employed at some organization, really includes the fact that it is a top-down management type of approach to business and business operations on a daily basis. So when we're talking about controlling, we're talking about upper level management, planning, organizing, commanding, doing the things that should be done in the way that they say it should be done. And on the other side of the ledger, we look at something that's called shaping. And shaping really indicates that upper management is concerned with the organization and views it as a personal experience, as opposed to the machine type of experience that the controlling image suggests. So when you're trying to shape an organization, upper management still is responsible for this, but they really want their employees involved in the decision making. They want them to participate. They want them to contribute to the organization, and as such, that they can develop a whole approach to business. So there are a couple of things that you have to understand when you're looking at choosing one of the images of change, whether you're controlling or shaping that organization, that there are some outcomes that accompany those choices. So one of the outcomes is something that's called intended outcome. So when we are looking at controlling an organization, for example, what we're going to do is we're going to say, look, we need this project completed by April 2nd, 2025. We know that if we give the individuals that are responsible for completing that project the right resources, the time, and the guidance and support, then the outcome will be intended, thus being the final completion of the project. But along that route, some other things happen. Sometimes we don't get to that or we don't fully recognize the outcome, and that's what we refer to as a partially intended outcome. So this is what we refer to as plan versus actual. We plan to finish that project on a certain date, but we really didn't get that project finished on time. We only got part of it on time, for example. And finally, sometimes there are unintended outcomes to change management. For example, if we were going to build a building and that was our intended outcome, well, if we built that building very well, one of the unintended outcomes might be the fact that we've increased our reputation in the industry and we garner new business from it. So 3 different types of outcomes that you're going to be dealing with. The other thing that you're going to be dealing with is the fact that there are specific images of changes that you are going to use in your journal entries, and you're also going to use them in your first and second assignments. So when we're talking about images of change, we have divided them, there's 6 of them, and each of those images of change are put into either shaping or controlling categories of the organization. So we're going to break those down for you. We're saying that in the controlling version of change management, you are going to find that there is a director image, a navigator image, and a caretaker image. And each one of these images suggests a different approach to business operations. So as we go down, we're going to look at each one of them. The first one is the director, and the director under the controlling banner is usually top management. And what the director really says is that if you want an intended outcome, you provide the resources and the people and the money and everything that you need in order to achieve that outcome. That outcome is accessible, is achievable. And if you do it in the right way and you do it the way that the director tells you to do, then the outcome is assured. There's a theoretical underpinning that accompanies this approach. One of the things that the theoretical underpinning suggests is that the actual image of change needs to be broken down into certain steps. And we're going to investigate Kotter's 8-step model in this particular course. The director says, if you follow these specific steps and you complete them in the way that they are laid out and complete them to fruition, then you are going to achieve the outcome that you set up. The next one we're talking about is the navigator. And the navigator really looks at business organization, and what that person says is control is the heart of the management action. You have to control all of the factors that affect the organizations, both internal and external factors. And we're going to talk about those a little bit later in another Zoom meeting, and you're going to apply those to both your change management journals and your change management assignments. So when you're talking about being a navigator or using the navigator approach or the image of change, what we're saying is that that individual knows that there is going to be some conflict within the organization, but to get to the final outcome, they have to control those changes and they have to address the external and internal forces acting on the organization. The theoretical underpinning is that the navigator understands that there are multiple variables involved in managing an organization, and that they have to get around those problems and issues. They have to remove obstacles. And really what happens is that to be successful using this approach, that you have to understand your people and use a bottom-up approach. And finally, the caretaker. The caretaker really is still focused on control in this image, but really understands that the forces acting on the company, the internal and the external forces, really can impede the progress of the organization. So the caretaker's responsibility is really what we refer to as sheep herding, taking the people that are involved, the employees and the stakeholders in the organization, and really trying to inform them and lead them the best way that that person can through the changes that are going to affect the company's operations. With the caretaker, the theoretical underpinning really says that life cycle theory is included in this image, and that organizations pass through certain stages from birth to death, and it has to go in that order. And along that lines, there are going to be challenges that the caretaker has to explain and sheep herd the individuals through that specific change. Now, on the other side of the ledger, there is the shaping approach when we're talking about looking at a more personal, humanistic viewpoint, and that we really want to take the stakeholders' opinions into account, and we want our people to be the best resources that we have. And the first image that you're going to look at is something that's called a coach. And really what the coach does is exactly what you'd think he or she would do. They are going to try to coach individuals along in terms of dealing with the particular change that is facing the company. So what the coach would do is set up what we call skills and drills to assist the stakeholders. So for example, that I've listed here, a coach might set up a HR in-service for staff in order to educate all the employees on HR policies and procedures. So that's one way that the coach would help address the issues of change within the company. Well, the theoretical underpinning of this image really includes the fact that if you provide the people with what they need, then they are going to be able to be very successful. The coach really is there to be a resource to help out individuals in terms of providing what they need and taking a team approach to solving issues of change within the organization. Now, the next image that we're going to talk about is the interpreter. And the interpreter really is the person that takes what management is asking the company to do and complete and break it down into group speak that everybody can understand and everybody can appreciate. So sometimes there's a convoluted message coming from upper management. The interpreter's job is to listen to that, to move through that message, to understand it completely, and to disseminate the information accordingly amongst the stakeholders. One of the best ways that they can do that is hold town halls where everybody is able to ask questions and get clarification in terms of what direction and the approach that the company is using with change management. And the theoretical underpinning that accompanies this particular image of change is that there has to be a central focus and a structure in terms of how the process is started, it carries on, and then it finally is completed. So the interpreter really acts as an interpreter and explains each one of those elements in each category in terms of achieving the change initiative that has been started by the company and what the company wants to include. And finally, what we're going to look at is the nurturer. And the nurturer is similar in nature to the interpreter. They understand that even small changes can have big impacts on the company. If you think about it, even if you're changing the way that people get paid from biweekly to monthly, it's a small change really, but it can affect the operations of that company. The nurturer is there to support, to understand how those changes are going to affect individuals in the company itself. The theoretical underpinning is the fact that the nurturer understands that change is nonlinear. It doesn't happen in sequence. It can happen out of order and usually does for the most part. And the nurturer helps individuals understand that, in fact, that can happen and suggests ways to get around it. So why are we using these images? Why am I asking you to clarify them? Why am I asking you to understand them and apply them in your activities this year? Is that one of the things the change manager can understand is that when you're classifying the changes and the images, that you can classify the problems that come along with it and some of the resistance that is going to be apparent. The other thing that change manager will use is the fact that they can understand the perspectives of the individuals leading the change and or participating in that change. The thing to remember here, folks, is even though that we have broken these images of change down, usually change managers use a variety of images in order to get a change initiative implemented and succeeded and completed. So don't fall into the trap that every change manager only uses one of these images, and think about the manager that you're working for. Sometimes that person is a director, sometimes that person is a nurturer, depending on the individuals in the organization and the change that wants to be implemented. So please make sure that you understand these topics and the images of change, because I'm going to ask you to use them both in the first assignment and in your journal entries.